So what a week Parliament has had, and I'm recording this now on Thursday, and as you'll know, on Wednesday there was this massive, what can only be described as some kind of an implosion that happened in the Commons in relation to the 3 amendments on the Gaza conflict. I went in to watch some of the arguments before it completely descended into farce, and already you had these ludicrous situations of David Lammy, who I heard stand up and make a speech where he basically said, "I've always supported a ceasefire, we need peace now," and everyone jeering him, because you did feel as though the Labour Party were just at this stage running to catch up with themselves. But who were they running to catch up with? And I think that it was a very unsavoury spectacle to see parliamentarians seemingly not driven by the plight of the people of Gaza, but by a range of domestic considerations when they were discussing the war in the Middle East. The SNP motion was supposed to be the one that was debated, and only that, and then you could amend it, and we now know that something occurred with the Speaker of the House, and a Labour Party amendment was then accepted, and then a Conservative Party, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into the details of it, but a number of things struck me. Nothing that was voted on yesterday in Parliament would save one life of anybody in Gaza. It would not create a ceasefire, and in fact it did feel incredibly performative. The second thing was that there was a massive presence of pro-Palestinian supporters outside of Parliament. And I want to state for the record, there is nothing wrong with that. That is democracy. Why shouldn't they have a protest? Why shouldn't they queue up to go in and watch a debate at which 3 parties were discussing a variety of versions of ceasefire, and they were demanding a ceasefire? And I'm one of the people who've got very little sympathy with, at the moment, those pro-Palestine activists who I think are being very careless about the rise of anti-Semitic racism, a visceral anti-Semitic racism, who I think are often posturing around a modern version of anti-colonisation. But anyway, you're allowed to be naff politically, and we should defend their right to protest. But what I do think is very worrying is that we're in a situation where, at least on face value, the Speaker has said, the Speaker of the House of Commons, that the atmosphere was such that of intimidation of effectively Labour MPs, that if they were seen to vote against the SNP amendment, that their safety, their lives could be on the line. I do take that very seriously, genuinely, because I think that, but that wasn't the protesters outside, by the way, but there is an element, there is an atmosphere in society at the moment of total intolerance, bullying and intimidation from some sections of activism whose self-righteousness in relation to what's happening between Israel and Gaza takes a very one-sided approach, which is that if you do not go along with totally condemning Israel as responsible for genocide, that you are responsible for the murder of babies. And there was one nightclub owner, who I couldn't believe it, from East London, a Jewish nightclub owner, who's just stood down from running the club because he got a package with, babies' clothes drenched in fake blood with Jewish, Zionist baby killer written on the page, which might as well have said Jewish actually, on a piece of paper. And then there was threats of firebombing the club, and there was graffiti all outside it. And he's like, and then they threatened to boycott the club. I mean, that is like not, sadly, as unusual as you'd want it to be. People have got to see that's a very ugly, dark mood that's very different than protesting outside of Parliament, which you're allowed to do. So I'm fearful that we're getting things tangled up. Regardless, we should be absolutely wary of any parliamentarians succumbing to a mood of intimidation. There was a time when cartoonists were told that if they depicted the Prophet Muhammad in a way that was deemed to be offensive and disrespectful, that they would be murdered for doing so. And we know that in France, the cartoonists from the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo were murdered for those kind of depictions. And for a while, a brief moment of enlightenment, everybody went round with a Je suis Charlie sticker on, or that was the sentiment. Are we now to conclude that if a threat of violence is used and people say don't use that cartoon, or don't use the wrong pronoun? I mean, I don't want to just confine it to the problem of Islamism, although that is a very specific and real problem. But that mood of threats, that we all just go, oh, all right then. And as parliamentarians to do that, that would be incredibly damaging to any notion of democratic representation without fear or favour. You don't have to be in the hands of big business or the mafia or anything to be corrupted. You can be corrupted by fear, or by saying, oh, I don't want to offend that particular identity group or that particular identity group. I don't want them to call me a bigot or to threaten me or my family. I want to get elected again. I don't want to upset them. Goodness me, that is a terrible conclusion. So, very dark atmosphere, I would say, and not yet resolved. As it happens, I have been talking about, in a roundabout way, the issues to do with the Israel-Gaza conflict during my time in the Lords this week. So we've had this ridiculous bill. I've got to get the title because it's so mad. Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill. I mean, what? Talking about not sexy. Anyway, it's basically the government's attempts, led by Michael Gove, to make it illegal for any council, university or arts organisation or any public body to vote to boycott an Israeli investment. And it's very specific because it's about investment policy. It's about whether you put your pension funds into Israeli goods or companies, all of these things. Now, I just want to note, and you can look at my speech below because I try and explain it there, I absolutely despise the outlook of BDS. They really are much more interested in harming Israel and Israelis than they are in defending Palestinians. This is not going to do anyone any good. It's just a question of, they literally treat Israel as though it's kind of like, we would need to be Israel free, like it's like sort of like dirty to be associated with Israel. And we've seen the consequence of that. People screaming bloody murder outside shops that they consider to have connections with Israel, which is far too reminiscent of the kind of anti-Jewish shock protests that we had in Nazi Germany. At least people might think, oh my God, isn't that a problem? So I don't like the boycotting campaigns. I thought Nick Cave was cool before, but I really love the fact that they tried to bully Nick Cave from appearing in Tel Aviv in a music festival, and he said the more that BDS tried to bully him, the more he was determined to go. So kind of the headline was, BDS made me go to Israel to play. I thought, brilliant. We need a bit of that kind of defiance. I think all of those things and lots more. But I do not think that the government should be entitled to pass a law that makes it illegal for elected officials at councils to make a decision about how they spend their money or their investments. Also, this is a government that's spent ages top down telling people how to invest money. They say don't invest in fossil fuels or follow the ECG deadlines or your targets and so on, net zero. I mean, so they kind of they are making an exception of Israel, and that, of course, is the very point of BDS, which is BDS hold Israel to a different standard and far higher standard in relation to so-called ethics than any other country in the world. Happily let Iran and Turkey and all sorts of things be invested in, but not Israel, because they're the uniquely pariah state. Well, you can't then have a government that then uniquely mentions that Israel can never be boycotted in a bill, and what's more, lays down ridiculous requirements. They say that if a council or an arts council or somebody said, we would have done BDS boycotts were it not for this bill, that would be against the law. I mean, how mad is that? So the government got rightly trashed, but it shows you that it is wrong to say, a for or against in a black and white way, because in some ways the people who were arguing against the government were maybe more sympathetic to the BDS boycott campaign. Also, lots of them were. And if you wanted to kind of performatively show that you really thought it was important to fight anti-Semitism, you basically go along with the bill. I just don't think that's the way politics should be done. I don't think that's how pieces of legislation should be passed. We should not allow that to occur, which is also something that happened. I also just came in on a question on hate crime legislation. It was just a short question, I think put forward by the Lib Dems, and they wanted to say we should have more hate crime legislation to deal with the rise of anti-Semitism, and to be even-handed, they said Islamophobia. I argued against that on the basis that hate crime legislation is always going to be just anti-free speech, and you know, who defines what hate is. But one thing I noticed was the Labour Party, and I've heard them do this several times this week, accused the Tory party of backing down on hate crime because they were getting rid of the monitoring or the recording by the police of non-hate crime incidents. So here we are in the middle of a serious rise in anti-Semitism, and the Labour Party want to reintroduce non-crime hate incidents being recorded by the police. It seems very dangerous to me that you take a very heightened moment like this to bring in a completely illiberal and draconian either anti-boycott law, or indeed to reintroduce something that it was a really good thing that we got rid of, which was those ridiculous police monitoring of people who haven't even committed a crime, and that being kept on their records. Finally, on this particular issue, there was a debate on anti-Semitism last night, Wednesday night. I thought it would be packed. I mean, there was no one there. And we'd had all this big incident down in the Commons, just down the corridor, and then nobody came to the debate on anti-Semitism. It was, to say the least, a bit disappointing and a bit demoralising. But there were some fantastic speeches, and you can see mine, not fantastic, but I would urge you to have a look at the speeches. I wanted to, somehow, because the other speakers, even though there's only 2 or 3 of them, told such grim stories about the rise of anti-Semitism, I wanted to give a kind of hopeful, positive account of a new solidarity campaign, Our Fight. So I hope you'll have a look at that, because I think it's well worth trying to find ways of saying we're going to not be cowed by this ugly, nasty mood, and we're going to actually go beyond identity and make a commitment to universal anti-racism and fighting this new type of anti-Semitism. And it has to be said that I didn't mention it last night, but I am aware of the fact that we have got this very unholy alliance that is frightened to say that we've got a problem of Islamism. And what really I want to emphasise is Islamism, not Islam as a religion, and not Muslims. But there are too many Muslims who are going along with Islamism, and I'm afraid lots of useful idiots on the radical, decolonising, left-leaning, social justice crowd who just almost don't know what they're getting into. And as an example of the kind of confusions that we get here, Lord Austin, was suspended from being the chair of a housing association in Dudley because he made a joke or a glib comment about Islamism, and the Islamists, check before you go to bed tonight that the Islamists aren't digging a tunnel under your kitchen without noticing, having a go at UNRWA. He got suspended for that because they said he was Islamophobic. So, I think that is a form of intimidation. You're not allowed to criticise Islamism. Well, let me tell you, Islamism led to Charlie Hebdo murders. Islamism has led to the rise of Hamas, who are antagonistic to freedom for anyone living in Gaza, anyone in that region. Islamism is pernicious and has nothing to do with social justice, peace, or anything else. And of course, led the attack on October the 7th. Right, quick, tiny bits now. I did my first ever oral question today in the Lords. I've been there 3.5 years, and I never get balloted. But I want to thank, in particular, somebody who's been working with me, a researcher, who will be nameless. She wants to be an anonymous friend she just kept resubmitting the question until it eventually got taken, and it was on guidance to schools on gender confused or teenagers, and I'm really glad that I raised it, and it actually led to a nice little discussion. So I was pleased with that. That's one to note. I also got invited to go to a reception held by Theatr Clwyd and by some Welsh MPs, basically because Theatr Clwyd's in Flintshire and Buckley's in Flintshire, and they sort of put two and two together. It wasn't the best attended, but actually it was really exciting because when I was growing up, Theatr Clwyd got opened and I used to hang out there. That was my kind of alternative scene. And so it's like quite nice being treated as the Baroness now, going, oh, you must come back, Baroness Fox. And, you know, I was thinking, I was like rather degenerate in those teenage days. But anyway, Theatr Clwyd, very close to my heart. What was really funny was they were giving a little speech about when it opened, and they were talking about like the olden days. And I was going, oh yeah, I was there then, right? And then the MP and the new chief executive and all the staff hadn't been born when it was open. All I can say is, I'm getting old. But anyway, it was quite nice being allowed to be in that. And then finally, I was there for the investiture, the welcoming of two new peers, John Moynihan and Matthew Elliott. And I wanted to say something about that. They're both peerages given by Liz Truss. Huge amount of cynicism and nasty sneering on the Labour benches, who I sit behind them, while they were brought in. I don't care what anyone says, right? Both of them, who were involved in the Brexit years and vote leave and various things, and I don't know them very well, but I know them a little bit. I just want to say that they were humble in coming in. They both are committed to making a difference in the House of Lords, and those people who think that, for example, they have some God-given or political right to be there because, oh, I don't know, Tony Blair brought them in or David Cameron brought them in, and then they're above all the kind of Liz Truss, you know, or people like me who were brought in as part of the Brexit, post Boris's Brexit, feeling guilty, and all of that sort of thing. In the end, the House of Lords should not exist. But while it's there, those of us who are in there should try and use it to do some good and make some political points. And therefore, I wish John Moynihan and Matthew Elliott good luck in using it for some political positive gains. And I hope that I can continue to use it to make points that otherwise would never be heard within the Palace of Westminster.